Welcome to another episode of the Offer Letter Candidate Spotlight, the podcast where job seekers get the space to talk about their experience, their impact, and their career journey in their own words. Today, I am joined with Jason Levine. Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Jason, for everybody getting to know you for the first time, can you just give the audience a quick background of your professional experience and kind of the problems that you solve from a day-to-day perspective?
My name is Jason Levine again. I am a front-end software engineer and technical product manager. I graduated from the University of Connecticut with a degree in computer science engineering, which kind of came with a minor in math built in as well. I've worked in a bunch of different industries in my life, in my professional career that started in the healthcare space at Optum or United Healthcare, and later moved on to e-commerce at Chewy. A lot of the problems they dealt with there were related to the analytics space, the front-end analytics space specifically. And I've done a lot with kind of visual design as well, like prototyping or user testing, accessibility, things like that. Yeah, that's me.
For anybody who hasn't worked in a large e-commerce environment like Chewy, can you kind of set the stage of what kind of scale, complexities, and kind of expectations you're dealing with on a day-to-day?
Yeah, sure thing. So when I joined Chewy in 2019, they were actually pretty small. It's kind of a big tech player now, but I joined when it was about 100 or 150 engineers. So it was much kind of lower risk, and then it grew with it to become larger. It's a very interesting environment because there's a lot of changes happening very quickly, like eventually to daily releases and trying to track like when sales happen on other sites that we're, trying to price match with, trying to have the correct server load for holidays or like prime days. And then a lot of it from my end on the front end is basically just keeping up with the ever-changing technologies. I joined right kind of when JavaScript frameworks and micro front ends were becoming big. So we had one code base when I joined, and I helped migrate them first to Vue and then to React. So it's a lot of just kind of keeping up with design trends and patterns to make the best looking site, the most accessible site, dealing with people from all different devices, making sure they can check out, shop, click through everything, which are things that are also rapidly changing. So yeah, it was an interesting environment.
What type of impact did that have on you and the projects that you were working on?
Yeah, they were definitely a company that, I mean, it's weird to say, but benefited pretty well from COVID, both in the sense of e-commerce taking off and also lots of people were getting pets because they were now home all the time. They had the capacity for it, and then they had to get food for those new pets. So they took off in a lot of different ways, and we kind of responded, as did a lot of companies, I think, with tons of hiring. We were launching new pages and campaigns like every month. We got really big into the pet healthcare space in that time as well because people needed virtual, vet visits. They wanted chatbots were kind of taking off so people could get help for their pets or get like product suggestions from home. The whole other side of the company of like the actual shipping logistics, I know grew as well, but I was less involved in that space. But from my end, it was a lot of work of kind of those projects that I mentioned of moving to micro front ends and launching new pages that just kind of had to happen a lot faster because from the span of in that year from like March to April, all of a sudden 70% of the country was working from home when they weren't before. So it happened very, very quickly. A lot of new hires, a lot of onboarding, new teams being created. That was kind of when I began my move towards the analytics space. And yeah, it was a cool time to work through because it was otherwise a pretty kind of not slow moving environment, but we had more like weekly, bi-weekly standard releases, and that all of a sudden became our traffic is tripled, and we had to have a lot more like on-call support and like emergencies and experiments also launching much, much faster.
So you initially joined Chewy as a front-end engineer and later moved into a technical product position. Was that the more analytics role that you had mentioned?
Yeah, so I joined I guess it was a newly created analytics team at the time. It was just me and one other engineer, kind of owning all of the analytics, capturing the data processing on the site. And um, we eventually learned that 2 engineers is not the best team structure for a company of that size. Kind of the short of it is that I eventually had to take on the role of the technical product manager for the team, running all the agile ceremonies and like ticket planning and things of that nature. And we'll probably dig into it a little more later in this, but it really showed me a different kind of side of everything, and I actually enjoyed it a lot.
So while you were at Chewy, and it could be in either one of these position that you were at, what did owning a problem actually look like at Chewy, especially across like some of the engineering and product and analytics kind of roles that you had?
Yeah, so a lot of what it entailed was just being the kind of the go-to person, obviously, for updates and projects status, but at the same time, I organized and kind of built a lot of the demos, which in the capacity where I was kind of both the engineer and the product manager, that meant doing every part of it, like organizing the demo, building it, presenting it to kind of the C-suite folks, taking feedback, updating tickets, making new ones on what has changed or what they saw in the demo that they liked or didn't like. So
Were
it
you
was
doing all
kind of,
this on your own, or did you have extra people helping?
at one time it was all on my own. There was 1 or 2 projects where I was kind of every hat. And that eventually we when that team grew a little bit and we hired more, it was less so, but there was a 6 or 8 month span where it was only 2 or 3 of us. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, it was a lot, but it was also, like I said, really cool to kind of get to do all sides of it and not have to, eye on others or like wait for other people's updates or have kind of miscommunications on what's being developed or what needs to be done. And I really learned a lot about properly scoping work and the hurdles that come with that, or trying to balance on our team specifically. Like there was a lot of support involved because anything breaks on the site or anyone has to run an experiment, it has to go through the analytics team. So we had a lot of office hours and things as well, and so scoping our own work was just kind of chaotic. Which is why we eventually hired a full-time product manager. But yeah, it was pretty fun.
So what did you learn about scoping your work? You said it was a little chaotic at times, but obviously you would have to learn how to do it properly. Like, what did you learn in that process?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest takeaway for me was usually to like not overcommit ever. Not necessarily always undercommitting and over delivering, but it's kind of always better to plan for things going wrong versus, I don't know, committing your full capacity, because that's almost never what's actually true. Like we operated in 2 week sprints, and if I gave myself 80 hours of work, like there's not a chance that's ever gonna be done, just with meetings and life and updates and usually more meetings. Like it's much better to, over time, I guess you learn like what everyone's real capacity is, and that kind of experience of learning everyone on the team and learning yourself and what you can really deliver. It just helps, I think, when scoping projects and being able to more accurately tell C-suite or like management folks, hey, here's what we can definitely get done. If we have time, we're also going to work on this. Um, and I think it just helps with employee burnout as well, to know that they have space for freedom to design things and build things and fix errors that are going to happen.
Yeah, that part of making sure your employees aren't burning out and that attrition that would happen and associated is so huge that I feel like it gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big advantage that I had, kind of being a developer on my own team and then becoming a product manager in that same team, or in that same space, is that I got to experience like good management and bad management from the software engineering side, and like how it affects my morale, even of, if you're overloaded with work, you're just not excited to be there, and the demos are different and everything's just a little more depressing sometimes. And so having the wherewithal to know like how different styles of product management can really affect people's quality of life, I think is an advantage.
And at one point, you were the principal owner of A/B testing across 15 different single page applications. How did that look like before you got involved? Was it working before you got involved? What did you do to kind of help those applications?
Yeah, so that was kind of my major role there, the subject matter expert for all A/B testing. Before I joined that team, it was one guy that had basically built out the experimentation. We worked with a company called Optimizely that does A/B testing, and our one engineer had built the integrations with it and wrote some documentation and then kind of handed it off to the product folks, the less tech side of the company. And it had been very, very just unorganized, both in the sense that if they needed support, they would have to work with him. Like there was no other person that they could make time with. And so experiments would take sometimes up to like a month from start to finish to design and launch. And that if there were any issues, he was the only one that knew the people at Optimizely to make those meetings. So it was just really, really slow, which was fine at the time of when they were small. But once we started to grow and experiments were needed to happen way faster, and like you mentioned, it was 15 different teams. Basically, every page at Chewy was a different team, whereas at the beginning, it was all one team working with all these different stakeholders and different, honestly, pages with different frameworks as well, really made it complicated. And so when I joined as the second engineer, I kind of shadowed him and learned all of what he had built. Eventually, to take it over, he left the company about a year later. So that was a good transition to have me do that. And then I kind of just landed in the spot as the owner. So it was a lot of office hours, a lot of support, working with these teams, trying to learn how their pages are built so that I could help debug and make sure the right data was getting sent for each experiment. Like if, we're testing if someone's clicking through a ad a certain amount of times, we want to be able to track exactly who they are, like what their pets are, did they make a purchase at the end, all different types of data. And it would eventually all have to go through me instead of him. So I really leaned into that and learned as much as I could, made friends with the engineers at Optimizely, had a lot of sessions with the different engineers at Chewy just to try to make things more streamlined. I wrote tons and tons of documentation, like walkthroughs on how to do things. Anytime stuff came to office hours, I would document the questions and made a little FAQ page, and we eventually didn't need the office hours, which was very, very important. And then later on, I would build them a whole new experimentation module, which we could potentially dive into afterwards. That was kind of my...
You led a design and build a new A/B testing module in React and TypeScript. What were the biggest technical and organizational challenges in rolling out across the organization and across the team?
Yeah, it's a long one. I won't take up too much time, but basically kind of what I was mentioning of how everything was built by one guy at this point was 3 years ago. Optimizely, as with any other software, keeps updating every couple months, keeps launching new versions, keeps deprecating old versions. And we were on an extremely old version. And also because the company was a different team for every page, 15 to 20 different teams, all running different software, all running potentially different experimentation platforms, it became very hard and sometimes impossible to track one user through their journey. You might visit 20 different pages. We might lose their information from one page to another if they went from a React page to a Vue page or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was not very standardized at first. It eventually, and I believe now, is much more standardized across the site. But when we first moved to microarchitectures, it was micro front-end architectures. There was a lot more freedom to it. Just kind of whatever tools people were most comfortable with, migrated their page to that. Same with experimentation platforms. Some people had used like Google's, or we had an in-house one that one team was trying to make. So whatever experiments on their page they were running, they could do whatever they wanted. And my kind of task was to standardize the whole site because we really needed to run experiments, like follow one person through their journey. Otherwise, it's pretty useless if you can't see the end result of what they did on their journey through the site. So for me, it was in the first kind of few months, it was a lot of interviews. I sat down basically with the senior or most senior engineer on every front end team and chatted with them about like, here's what we're planning on doing. What are your struggles with experimentation right now? Which everyone had a lot of struggles. It's kind of what led to all the office hours. There just wasn't really a clear direction in things, and now we're trying to make one. So I had to figure out what, front end framework to use for this that would be compatible with every team, which is where we eventually landed with React when I kind of discovered that every team was going to have to move to React. So it was kind of a, hey, once you do this, you'll be able to use, our site-wide experimentation. And so it was kind of an incentive as well. And then same with TypeScript. That was just, I don't want to say up and coming because it had been pretty popular, but it was gaining a lot more traction and I think is very widely used now. So that was just a skill that kind of personally I just wanted to learn as well. I hadn't worked with it before and I really get to dive in and kind of forced to learn things when I build a project with it. So that was the kind of software combination we landed on for it, or I landed on for it. And then kind of same thing as before, this was one where I had to really scope all of my own work as well. So these meetings I had with those engineers, I had to take tons of notes and frequently translate them to actual actionable tickets that we would scope across. It goes about a year and a half out that I had to scope. So however many sprints that is, 25, 26, just in order of what's, the most important features, what are the ones that I can actually do, what I can actually deliver. And yeah, you can imagine that led to a lot of turmoil, maybe not turmoil, but a lot of bumps in the road of even just the fact that whenever we wanted to test things, we can't test on every page across the site without disrupting what they're doing. So I learned a lot about kind of more iterative releases, minor releases versus major releases. I had to work with a lot of them in pair programming sessions just to be very clear on, hey, here's what might change when we do this. Don't freak out. Don't, message us if something looks different because we're working on this. And that project had probably the most demos of anything that I had worked on because every week or 2 weeks I had something that was going to be impacting what their data looked like or what their front end attributes looked like. And we knew from experience that anytime something changes, people, will sound an alarm at midnight for us. And so we really had to invite everyone to these sessions and be like, hey, here's exactly what's changing. We record the demos, we send them out. A week later, we make the change and just hope that everyone had seen it by then. So I got really good at planning demos and sending notes and sending follow-ups, kind of learning how people best want to receive those. A lot of people don't want to join live in person, and so the recordings are super useful. Some people don't even want to watch recordings, so the notes are super useful, the shorthand notes.
One other thing that I saw on your resume is within 3 months, experimentations have increased by 150% on your time at Chewy. So what changed? Was it tooling? Was it trust, documentation? I know we kind of talked a little bit about some of the experimentations, but what on that kind of side, how did you increase it that much?
Yeah, so that tool specifically was a huge part of it. Same as what I was talking about earlier with the kind of crazy amount of documentation that I ended up making and, eventually offloading office hours entirely. That was usually something that slowed a lot of teams up. But the kind of conclusion of that project that I was working on, it unfortunately launched after I was laid off. I didn't know it at the time that I wouldn't get to see it to completion. I saw it to 95% completion. Basically, it just streamlined everything all the way from experiment design. There were just much less questions around how do we change this specific variable on the front end, because I had documentation on how to do that. As long as everyone kept up with the versioning of Optimizely that I had been pushing, we could see a lot more things from our side. We were much less blind as to what was happening on these pages. So they were just able to spin up things much faster without having to, wait until Friday at 1 p.m. for our office hours, which was a lot of times what had happened before. They'd have to come back the next week and that would just kind of slow everything up. So that end, for the most part, is what sped things up, but also I built a lot of kind of capabilities within it to really start and stop experiments very easily. Before there was kind of a stamp of approval that was needed. They would have to run us through what analytics changes they were making so that we could confirm that that was okay. It wouldn't impact other pages. But because everything was now going to be one package that we had visibility into. We didn't need that. We had a lot of automated testing now that was built into it that I could just run, check every page, make sure there were no regressions within 20 seconds. And with any merge that was made, all of that combined really took the time down from like 2 to 3 weeks to potentially 1 day, which, you figure, they can run 30 or 40 more experiments every month, which is hard to kind of scale the actual financial impact of that. But I imagine it was very, very significant. So that 150% number is probably actually a lot more. I think I just am generous with it because I didn't actually see the launch, assuming, and I've followed up a little bit since I left, and I can see things live on the site that I had built. I know they were using it, and I guarantee the impact was very significant.
And kind of moving on, I mean, your experience at Chewy is pretty vast. You touched a lot of things. If you don't mind, I kind of want to talk a little bit about that analytics side. On that side, you owned part of the web analytics infrastructure. What types of things, what kind of signals were you looking for? What were you tracking, and what mattered to some of the stakeholders within the business there too?
Yeah, so that is definitely something that changed frequently. What what was most important when I first started, it was very, very minimal. We just basically were tracking, at Chewy you had to make an account in order to make a purchase, and so once someone did that, we had whatever information they entered, usually some device info, some location info, which on its own was usually complicated because I had to keep up with a lot of regulatory laws, what we can and can't track. Are they in Europe? Are they in California? Like there was all these different things that I had to learn about, which was interesting to keep up with, and is constantly changing.
Yeah, GDPR in Europe is no joke to mess with either. So
Yeah, that was one thing that I guess sidebar a little bit my kind of side gig of doing accessibility audits for people. That's one thing that I've really learned a lot about is incoming laws and deadlines that a lot of companies are not keeping up with, that they're going to have to keep up with next year. But yeah, so it was initially very small. I think as with any company that's growing, they eventually want more and more. They're like, oh, we could potentially track this from user. Let's do it. So there's kind of a lot of, I don't know, sometimes moral ambiguity of it, of like, do we want to actually track this much? Are we allowed to? The whole thing was, you have to advertise to users on what cookies they want to save or not. That eventually came into play. One of my projects was trying to be able to track users while they're anonymous all the way through when they log in, just through kind of minimal device signals, which there's hundreds. I don't know if anyone's familiar with just the amount of things that the websites can collect nowadays, but everything from like your volume slider, your screen resolution, your other things you're logged in on, your applications, like there's infinite amount of things if companies wanted to. Obviously a lot of those are far too invasive, and I put a stop to a lot of the things that they wanted. But
yeah, I mean, just kind of
yeah,
from a recruiting standpoint, like I'm able to see if people are coming in through a mobile device, through a desktop, right? And that's just at a very basic level. And just to see where I have to optimize. Are we optimizing for mobile, or are we optimizing for desktop applications, right? So everything is
yeah,
mobile basically now. So I
yeah,
was basically
that's
told if you're not doing mobile, you're behind.
Yeah, mobile first was the big thing. Kind of, I think that started around COVID as well, because people are doing a lot of online shopping in bed, or iPads, iPhones. But yeah, that's a good point. That's another side of it, is using the collect data to see where things are failing. Like if we notice a bunch of checkouts are failing, we can try to match up the different attributes of those people that had failed checkouts. And if you see, they're all using Safari, that's very helpful to us doing the debugging or sending it to the team where the issue was. So it is very useful data in that sense to try to, improve the user experience. It was usually never used for, any bad reasons. I guess obviously which ads to serve is something that comes into play. Like if you have a dog, we don't want to serve rabbit food ads on the front page because they're never going to click that. So there's things like that too that are pulled from, data you entered and saved into the site yourself. But yeah, there's lots of it.
And early in your time in Chewy,
Mhm.
you led the redesign of the product listing page and migrated them to a new front end framework. What kind of impact did that have, if you can recall, on some of the bugs that were there, the deployment, and some of and on the teams as well?
Yeah, so that was when I joined. It was just a JavaScript engineer, was their phrasing of a front end engineer. And like I mentioned before, we had there was one code base, the whole company, the whole maybe two, a back end and a front end code base, but the whole website was one. And as the engineering team grew up to 150, 200 engineers, the releases became really hard. If you wanted to release something on one page, it was going to get merged into the code base that ran the entire site. So basically, we had an entire team of QA folks that would have to go through the entire site to check, a checklist of everything to click through, everything to submit, to create an account, to purchase. And it would take days, sometimes 3 to 4 days to test a release. And if something failed, that would restart. They'd have to fix it and start the testing over again. So even the 2 weeks, the biweekly releases were sometimes unachievable. If every team wants to change something, the list could be dozens or 100 things long, and that just was never reasonable. So we'd have to split them up. That was kind of the main driver in moving to a micro front end architecture, which would basically mean that, our PDP page or PLP page, which is the listing page as you browse through an e-commerce site where all the results are listed. That was the team that I was on. It would mean that we could make our own releases just in that environment, and it would be totally independent of everything else, and same with all the other pages. So that obviously was an incredibly appealing thing to management. Like, oh, we could, do all these releases independent of each other. In the same time as we're, modernizing our tech stack. It's a lot of advantages to it. And so I joined kind of right as we were rolling into that. I got to work for the first time with like a real design team that had built, they called them widgets at the time, but basically front end components. So like a product tile, a facet chip, the sidebar, like all of these things that before were just one block of HTML. Now we're going to be actual components, which the front end frameworks are entirely component based now. So that was my introduction to that. But we really got to work in depth with like matching a design, making sure it was compatible with different browsers and devices. There was tons of work on the back end as well to split away from the massive code base. By the end of it, once we were actually pulled out, again, we were running on Vue on the front end at this time. I think it was Next.js to make it independent. We were able to do releases daily if we wanted to. We could push code, have our automated tests run, and have it released to whatever staging environment or production environment, and the other teams wouldn't have to worry about it. That was a 6 or 7 month, effort to get from one code base to these separate ones, but that was really the goal of it. And by the time that was all completed, and by the time I left, teams were sometimes even doing multiple releases daily and, could easily roll back one specific page versus having to roll back the entire site, because that would then cause its own mess of other people that had priority releases or like things that had to be out, for sales. So it really modernized everything. And I'm sure that's how a lot of other companies do it. It was kind of my first experience of effectively a startup kind of modernizing, but it was really cool to learn about and kind of see how things should be done the right way.
And before you were even at Chewy, you spent some time at Optum. How did working within like a company that's more like in the healthcare space differ from an e-commerce company?
Yeah, so I guess there's two sides of it for me. The first side being that just the size of the company, obviously not true for all healthcare companies, but Optum Unit Healthcare was 300,000 employees and Chewy was
I did
500.
not know it was that big.
So that was the major drive and why I ended up leaving. It was just really hard to like not have the cog in the wheel kind of feeling. My manager's manager was in an office somewhere in Minnesota and I would never meet them. And the C-suite were these people that, you know, run the board and you would never meet them. But at Chewy on my first day, I met the CTO. Like he's just in the office. So that was a major difference, but that's, not related to the industry, just kind of a big versus a small company. I think it's a little tough because my honestly biggest takeaway was just that like the impact of what I was doing was strangely much harder to feel in the healthcare space. I just feel like it's such a, I don't know, more chaotic. Obviously they're both for-profit spaces here, but there's just so many things wrong with healthcare system and like so many things that could be fixed or that like are out of date, and it's just such a huge industry that's just way harder to, I think, make an impact in. For me specifically, I was working on internal tools for the most part. I did a little work with Optum RX when it was going through a redesign, but even that took like years to push something out, and even then like tons of the feedback was still negative. Usually people's experience with healthcare is negative. Like they're just, you don't get a lot of positive feedback. You get I can't use this site, like I can't get my meds, So it's a lot harder to feel, I don't know, not feel good about the work, but feel like you're making a lot of change. Whereas at Chewy, I had a lot more kind of immediate positive feedback from the stuff I was changing. It allowed me to get a dog when I first joined, and I was working in a network of other people that had pets. And when we launched things or did user testing, we got to see people, use the site or order things or get help for their pets. And it was just very immediate. Like you could see things were easier. People were usually super grateful, or like Chewy specifically has a lot of positive, like, customer feedback reviews, and I could see the things I was changing, making people's experiences better. And that was just a lot harder to get for me, specifically in the healthcare space. I know that's not true for all healthcare companies. Startups, I'm sure, is different, but that was my main kind of difference.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because I do use Optum and I am a Chewy customer, right? And I'm also a pet owner, right? Our interactions with Chewy are just so much better. Like we have a 17-year-old cat that's on a prescription with food.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we went to our vet and we told her that our cat just doesn't like the food anymore. She's like, where did you buy it? Did you buy it from us or did you buy it from somewhere else? We're like, no, we bought it from Chewy. She's like, just contact them. Chewy will refund you. And it's not a big deal. And just like the vets know how well the customer service is. I want to keep going back to Chewy because the customer service is great. They email us all the time when it's our pets' birthdays and it's just reminders. I don't want to go use Optum. I don't want to like as that tool. Like I had to ask somebody at work the other day on how to use something. I kind of appreciate where you're coming from on that sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just, I mean, obviously the size and just like all the regulations around healthcare too, like things, HIPAA laws and what they can and can't do or make on a site. I think it really ends up making things hard to use, or because it takes so long, everything feels kind of outdated. Like your Aetna portals or whatever sometimes feel years behind, and it's because they are like they couldn't use, certain tracking tools or certain libraries. Yeah, it's just I don't know, unfortunate state.
And so you were also, I think this was at Optum as well, but you were mentoring some junior engineers pretty early on in your career. How did that shape how you work within a team moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually probably my favorite part of Optum, and honestly one of my favorite parts at Chewy as well was the mentoring. When I joined Optum, or when they kind of gave me an internship while I was in college and then hired me right out of college, it was through this development program. It was called the Technology Development Program. And essentially it was just a class of all new hires. For me, it was like 40 of us that all joined at the same time, and they had a class in the fall and a class in the spring. I know I'm going to get this wrong. I think I was part of the 11th or 12th class. And so it was really cool just to, like when we interned, they housed us all in the same apartment floor. It was almost like a college dorm, basically, like all these people my age that are now working at the same company, mostly in the same field. And it was a really, really cool space to, I think, get into the corporate world for the first time with all these resources. And then like if we had questions, there was, people from the previous class who were just 1 year behind and so on and so on. It was very much like I guess like a fraternity, like big and little situation. Like you'd have, someone to look up to, and then people would join after you and they would ask you questions, and they kind of framed it that way as well. Like everyone from one class would, you could volunteer to basically host like 2 or 3 of the people from the incoming class as, their mentor. And so it was really this like family tree almost of people that had their mentor and then their mentor's mentor. So I signed up for that just because I had good experiences with the person that I had worked with. And so they hooked me up with 3 new hires the next year. And I really got to just kind of, deliver them the same experience that was given to me. Like, hey, this is your first time in the corporate world. Lots of things aren't going to make sense. Like, you're going to have a lot of questions that feel stupid to ask, but come to me because, I had the same questions, and like it is weird. A lot of things are different than college in the real world. So I got to be really good friends with the 3 of them, and I still talk to 2 of them now, and this is 10 years later. Same with my mentor. I think I hung out with him like a month ago. Like it just built a really cool like stepping stone network, and it really kind of highlighted the impact of mentoring and having a mentor to me, because at Chewy, when I first joined, and like I had seen interns join that didn't have a mentor, and it just really leads to a kind of socially like isolating feel, joining a company by yourself, and you're assigned to a team and you got to figure it out. Like you have a lot of stupid questions and like a lot of things you want to talk about, even if it's, salary. Like that's an important conversation that I made sure my mentors could talk to me about. Um, things that you wouldn't talk to your manager about, or that might not be comfortable, or I just think it's a really, really important relationship to have. And so I continued that on, and through Chewy, whenever, like I said, we had a lot of interns and co-ops, and I made sure to like make myself available to them, give them one-on-ones on my team, walk them through the code base, pretend they know absolutely nothing, because a lot of times it's a brand new world. Having those check-ins on the opposite end, finding myself a mentor at Chewy, like I went out of my way to do that and work with a senior engineer because I need that help just as much. And yeah, that's honestly something that I ask about in a lot of interviews when companies ask, what is it you're looking for in a company? I always see if they have, mentoring or mentoree opportunities. Not that it's a, necessity, but it's just something that I really, really value, and kind of motivates me a lot as well.
And looking back at your time at Chewy and Optum, what's something that you're extremely proud of? And it can be either technically, it can be team wise, like anything that as you're looking back in your professional career, kind of what is that one thing that you always put your pen in and say, I'm extremely happy and how this went and very proud of what that went, how it went.
Tough, because we just went through the 2 things that I'm probably the most proud of in
And that's fine.
those
You can
conversations.
use the answers.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, I think it's exactly what we just talked about. I think the mentoring and the relationships that I built really, really changed my experience at both companies. And I think has even carried on to like part-time jobs that I have now, is just to always, find someone that I can ask questions to or have uncomfortable conversations with in a comfortable environment. And it really, like, I think most friends that I have now from either those 2 jobs kind of stemmed from those experiences, either the program or like the mentorship, or, if you have enough meetings with someone, eventually you'll become friends. Like if I talk to someone that much, eventually it carries on and just really helps on like tough days at work, or if I have legitimate questions. And I think it's very, very easy, especially in a COVID or post-COVID remote world, to just, isolate yourself. Like once we stopped being in the office at Chewy, I definitely could have just sat here and not talked to a single person all day and just done my work. But I really went out of my way to like continue building those relationships and like talking to other people that are remote, just to, how crazy is this? Like the, the conversation we all had in March or April of 2020. And yeah, it's just something that I guess wasn't easy for me, just being an introvert in general. And so I'm definitely proud of those relationships that I built and maintained. And hope to continue building in future roles is having to deal with in-person work and remote work and like the comparisons of those two environments.
I thought Optum was 100% on site, right? And then looking at your background about Chewy was hybrid as well. But then obviously we all went remote during COVID as well. So what type of impact did that have? And honestly, remote work is hard because it takes so much longer to build some of those relationships too. Like you have to be very intentional about everything that you do in a remote environment.
Yeah, yeah, both were full. I mean, I was living in Boston when I was working in Chewy, and like remote work didn't really exist. I mean, it did exist back then, but it was much more of a
Yeah.
luxury. When I joined, they had it was called a paternity leave policy where I could adopt a dog and work from home for 2 weeks to like welcome them into my life. And I used that my first month there. Now that's like a regular thing at most companies to just work remote. But I think I definitely had an advantage starting at a company full time before it went remote. Like you mentioned, I was able to just build like relationships a lot better. You know, I could see and talk to my manager. You could have lunch with people. And I think before that transition to full remote, I could carry over those relationships. Whereas now, you know, if you start a company full remote or hybrid, it's just, yeah, it's a lot different, a lot more difficult to navigate. But yeah, I think we're all learning that at the same time.
Yeah. And so kind of talking about kind of next steps, you're obviously out there looking for a new opportunity. What type of opportunities are you looking for? What interests you? What is the like what are you looking for in that next opportunity as well?
Yeah. So right now I am exploring opportunities in kind of both the front end space as well as the product project management space. I made it to a senior front end engineer role at Chewy and was a technical product manager there, which is just a product manager who was kind of intimately familiar with the technology as well. And so I've kind of continued on both of those paths after I was laid off, built my personal like portfolio, taken, you know, project management classes, and some of the specific industries that I've kind of been leaning towards is one just on kind of personal levels, the pet or animal like healthcare space, almost kind of combining my, you know, two previous roles. That space is really important to me. I have a dog that has a heart condition, and so we've had to deal with a lot of these things and like online portals and just some of the struggles with that. And it's just really somewhere that I would love to be able to give back and work on. Also, different tangent from that, the gaming industry is actually very interesting to me. It's kind of how I got my start in technology as a kid and really hooked me on everything. And so that's a space that I would also really enjoy. And then as well, kind of the fitness sports industry or like tech wearables. Fitness has always been really important to me just for mental health, physical health, during a lot of different times in my life. And I met a lot of friends through sports as well. So really to kind of tie that with my tech background, I think would be cool. And then I think professional level, the retail and e-commerce space is somewhere that I could very easily contribute to. I've just worked a lot of kind of with the background of all of that. And now I work a part-time job in retail, so I've seen the physical side of it as well. And just, yeah, have a lot of knowledge into the problems that are faced there that are coming up. Like I mentioned with accessibility in the future. Yeah, so those are kind of industries that I lean towards, but I'm also at the same time very open to learning new ones. I yeah, setting up and learning new industries is very fun to me. That's what I've had to do with this retail job that I didn't know much about before, and now I know everything there is to know about the back of house at this store, and it was cool to get into.
And sometimes jumping into a new industry is also a little refreshing too, because it puts you out of your comfort zone, right? And you get to know everything that comes up, right, within that.
Yeah, I think that
So
was something at like Optum that I was almost too familiar with all the issues in the healthcare space that I was ready to, you know, maybe find something new at the pet market. It was refreshing.
but Jason, I want to thank you for walking us through your experience and some of the impact that you've done at your prior companies. For anybody listening that wants to get a hold of you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my professional website, which is jasonlevine.dev, has all of my contact info. I have my GitHub, my LinkedIn, my email, my cell phone there. I'm happy to respond to anyone reaching out on any of those mediums. Yeah, that would probably be the best place to find. I think we can put that link in the notes for this.
Yeah, perfect. And if you're a recruiter or hiring manager that's building a team product, reach out to Jason if you need his help. I'll definitely make sure to include that link in the show notes as well. For everybody else listening, this is another episode of the Offer Letter Candidate Spotlight, and thank you for tuning in.